Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday's Fundamentalist Fails. And I know it may not be Friday where you are. Don't panic. It may not be Friday in your world. It is Friday in mine, and Friday is always Fundamentalist Fails. And today I'm picking on kind of a friend of mine, somebody that I've locked horns with as well as sort of get along with. So ups and downs. Today we're picking on one Donny Badinsky, who is he's a fundamentalist creationist over at Standing for Truth, which is kind of ironic, and you'll see why when we get into it. But he sort of does teams up with Kent Hovind and does all kinds of videos on why evolution isn't true. Now, Donny's an interesting one because he hosts debates on soteriology, but he doesn't really get into the philosophy side. Like a lot of the people over at his channel are these kind of presuppositionalist philosophy bros. He really doesn't get into that. He gets into just genetics and he wrote a book on ERVs, not very well received by the scientific community at all, needless to say. And his arguments are dependent upon more or less just sort of incredulity. Evolution couldn't happen because I don't believe it couldn't happen, or at least that's what I think his arguments are really based upon. But recently I was in one of his rooms and I sort of had a disagreement with him on chromosome 2 fusion and the cell architecture from a standpoint of correction mechanisms. He was sort of asking how cells developed, because if cells developed and correction mechanisms developed, like sort of repair mechanisms for when there are errors in the cell, how did they evolve at the same time? You need one for the other. So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. Now, I sort of said, hey, you're comparing modern cells when the systems were developed, or the processes were developed in the cell when it was more basal, basically much more primitive, if you can use that word. I don't like using that word for cells, and I fall back on it, but I don't like using it. And he sort of said, well, I don't want to talk about your proto cells. I don't want to talk about that kind of thing, which is kind of interesting, you know, that he sort of says, oh, you don't have any evidence for a proto cell. While promoting a god, which was highly ironic. So to cut a long story short, in the comments, he was sort of beating his chest and saying how he demolished me in the debate. And he famously won't accept any of my debate challenges. Now, I don't want anybody hassling him. I don't want you to go and give him a hard time. I don't want that. But just be aware that I keep challenging this man to a debate. And Donny keeps a dodging. He keeps... No, don't want to debate. Don't want to debate evolution with you. Don't want to debate any of the stuff with you. So, unable to get him to actually get into a debate with me, I thought I would sort of pick out a video of Donny's and just go through it. And I saw this one because I have, and full disclosure, I've been talking a lot with Dr. Dan Cardinal. And if you're unfamiliar with his work, he runs an amazing channel. Highly recommend it. Creation Myths. It's actually I'm a big fan of his. Actually, he's one of the smartest and well versed in evolution of people that I've met. I really want to go through one of his videos and sort of explain and show why I think he's being dishonest in what he's doing. And you know, I'm not going to I'm not going to sort of you know, claim that without actually showing what it is that he's doing and why I think it's dishonest. Because he cites papers that, well, let's be fair, they don't back him up. And so I've gotten all of the papers that he's referring to. We can have a look at them. We can have a look at his claims and see where he's coming from. So the ironic thing is that he's sort of Standing for Truth Ministries, which is a little ironic because I don't, is he doing it intentionally? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think that, but we'll see as we go along that his stance has changed on certain things. And I certainly didn't hear about this because there was a time where young Donny here, he would never admit there are beneficial mutations, ever. And so it's kind of very, very strange to me that sort of what Donny's doing and the assertions that he's making. It's kind of weird. But again, I don't want anyone to hassle him. I'm more than capable of hassling Donny all by myself. And to be honest with you, I like Donny. I think he's I get along with him. But I don't think that what he's doing is really in good faith. I really don't. And sort of to say that he demolishes me in debate when he won't actually debate me. And again, I don't want anyone hassling him. I'm just saying I've challenged this man on multiple occasions, and I keep getting sort of creationists coming up to me in chats and stuff and saying, why won't you debate Donny? Obviously he destroys you in debate. Why won't you debate him? And it's like, wow, you're listening to his hype. I keep challenging him. He keeps ducking and dodging and dipping and not actually getting into the ring with me. So let's go through this. This is Donny Deals, as he is called, which I find a little bit hilarious. Sorry, Donny. I find that hilarious. Or Dodgy Donny Deals doing evolution. I don't know what this is on the screen. It really doesn't have anything I really sort of think. And a lot of time he's talking about genetic entropy, which is interesting.
These amazingly designed DNA repair enzymes.
Well, first off, you've got to show that they were designed. So this is the problem. They just sort of claim that from incredulity, oh, it couldn't have been produced by nature, it must be designed. No, you've got to show that. You can't just claim it and say, well, I'm incredulous that it actually evolved, that it's got to be designed. Now, you have to show the design, which they don't do. They absolutely don't do. They compare them to cars, and they compare them to books, and they compare them to computer programs, and it all falls flat because they're not good analogies. And we'll get more into Donny's analogies. You don't see anything to like about Donny? Oh, look, I've met a ton of people like Donny, like salespeople and stuff. They're fine. I don't have a massive problem with them. But I do have a massive problem with him really misrepresenting stuff, which he does.
Fix a lot of these DNA breaks. So you're going to have a lot of mutations in somatic cells, like your skin cells. Mm-hmm. They're not going to be passed on. But mutations in reproductive cells,
they will be passed on. So we're talking about sort of germline cells. Somatic cells are the ones that sort of grow over time. They're like you said, your skin cells and things. Germline cells are ones where the mutations are passed on. But he's missing some real fundamentals. And again, I want to link to creation myths, because most of the information I've got on this has come from Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal, who was an amazing person, really good communicator of science. And he has a video on there going over his response to Basner and Sanford, and it's a very good response to them. It's an entire paper dedicated to correcting their errors. Essentially,
they can be passed on. And again, yeah, not every single mutation that occurs is passed on, but the ones that are passed on. They're deleterious. Most of them are slightly deleterious.
There's not a problem with that. There's no problem with that. So deleterious mutations, it doesn't matter if they're, when he says passed on, he's talking about mutation rate, right? So he's talking about the unique mutations or de novo mutations that are coming up in the lineages of organisms that pass it on. But what you've got to understand is, and something that he never mentions when he talks about mutation rate, is something called substitution rate. Now, substitution rate is how much those mutations get fixed in the population. Now, the reason why he talks so much about mutation rate and not substitution rate is because substitution rate is highly variable. It's very highly variable. He can say, hey, this is the mutation rate. It doesn't matter. If those mutations are being passed on, but not getting fixed, not becoming a normal part of the phenotype of that organism, the genotype of that organism, then it doesn't matter, right? He needs to be talking about substitution rate, but of course he never does, because the substitution rate is the one that actually matters. And he never talks about it. And I don't know why.
And harmful. They're overwhelmingly harmful. Okay, man. Most of them being low impact, sure. And the mutation rate's high. In mammals in general, the mutation rate's high. In humans, the mutation rate's about 100 new mutations per person per generation. Okay, well, selection's limited. Selection's very...
Yeah, so that's probably a bit generous, but I think you know, you could make a case for it, that sort of on the upper echelon of a sort of thing. But it doesn't matter. It matters what the substitution rate is, not the mutation rate. Because if those mutations are being selected against and not fixed in the population, it really doesn't matter. Like, you know, we'll go into that a bit later, because I don't know if it's intentionally, but he misses mechanisms that guard against that kind of thing. The major one being recombination. It's amazing how much he does not talk about recombination, which is incredible. Now, for those listening, recombination is simply the way that sort of lineages work. The recombination is essentially breaking apart of the genetics through having children, and some of those children will express those deleterious mutations and some of them won't, right? So what recombination does is it serves to break apart the deleterious mutations from the beneficial ones, and then have some offspring with those mutations each type, and then they're selected against. And then that happens again and again and again and again and again. And it serves to break apart the deleterious mutations, isolate them in segments of the lineage, and then they're selected against. And that's how it works. But Donny doesn't talk about that. He talks about the mutation rate directly going into the organism's genotype. And that's not what happens at all. Like, just because you have a high mutation rate doesn't mean that the substitution rate is high.
Weak. Selection can only see the big mutations and can only remove the big mutation.
No, that's not true. And the reason why is because in the lineage, if recombination is breaking them apart, and basically what will happen is certain lineages over multiple generations will end up with, say, one line of the ancestor, the lineage will end up with a lot of detrimental mutations. And one will end up with, say, none, and maybe a couple of beneficial ones, or not none, but, you know, just nearly neutral ones and a couple of beneficial ones. So he is automatically assuming that every single offspring of that lineage will end up with all of the deleterious mutations. And that's not true, right? That isn't what happens. Those ones that have been unfortunately loaded up with deleterious mutations, even if they're only slightly deleterious, they will get selected against, and that lineage will be purged from that. That's how evolution works, and that's how recombination works. So I have here a where is it? Yeah. So this is sort of recombination affects allele-specific expressions of deleterious variants in human populations. So this is direct study of human populations, explaining how when they're expressed and they get the deleterious mutations piled up, they get weeded out essentially. But it's the ones who get the least amount of deleterious mutations and advantageous mutations that will actually survive and go on to propagate that lineage. So recombination acts as one of the processes to select against these deleterious mutations. And he can sort of go, oh, but they're nearly neutral. Yes, but when those deleterious ones pile up in an organism, they are selected against. And this is before substitution happens, that they become fixed in the population. And at that point, where they do become fixed in the population, the advantageous mutations will account for that. And we've got papers sort of showing that, yes, the beneficial mutations will actually compensate for that.
Selection may be able to amplify the rare beneficial mutation, but the
Yeah, so he's referencing Basford and Sanford, and now the Creation Myth does a fantastic rebuttal on this. Dr. Dan has Dan Stern Cardinal has a paper out that sort of refutes them. The problem with the paper that Donny's sort of referencing is it puts the beneficial mutations at way below 1%, which is way less than we've observed in any population throughout the Earth. There's a really good lit review, and I'll link to that on this sort of paper and the one that Dr. Dan did that shows why that they've tweaked the numbers so that beneficial mutations they almost don't show up at all. Like they really take a very, very sort of a very unrealistic amount of them.
The conventional literature suggests that beneficial mutations, when they do happen, they happen infrequently, only about 1 in a million. And when
no, very beneficial, like sort of exceptionally beneficial, maybe, but not just beneficial. It's certainly not at that level. I'd like to see that in the where he's getting that number from. I really would.
They do, as we've discovered here, as we've discussed, they are typically reductive and functionally compromising to organisms. Now we can,
if they're functionally compromising, then they're not beneficial. This is the thing. This whole thing of what we've seen in, say, the Lenski labs, where the organisms can digest citric acid with no loss of being able to feed on its original food source. That's a beneficial mutation with no real downside. So that's not what we see. That's sort of an article of faith from Donny here. It doesn't really, that's not how it works. Usually beneficial, and there's a problem here with how they're defining fitness, because most mutations, whether they're beneficial or whether they're detrimental, is environment specific, usually environment specific. So something that allows you to digest citric acid, if there's no citrate around to digest, that's going to be a loss for the organism. It's going to be something that it puts energy towards that has no function. That's detrimental. But if there is citric acid around to digest, that's beneficial because it can get another energy source. So Donny's sort of saying, oh, well, he doesn't understand about sort of beneficial mutations can be detrimental, and detrimental ones can be beneficial depending on the environmental pressures that you are under. It doesn't want to, or doesn't seem to understand that.
Discuss all day the possibility of some of these beneficial mutations not being reductive in any way. And we've done that. We can discuss nylon digestion by bacteria. We can discuss lactose tolerance.
So these are two examples that I have used to Donny in the past: lactose intolerance and or lactose tolerance rather, and nylonase as beneficial de novo mutations are things that I've said to Donny in the past that he said, no, that doesn't count, kind of thing. That doesn't count. That's not beneficial. So it's actually incredible that Donny, who has pushed back and said there are no beneficial mutations, is actually acknowledging beneficial mutations. But I want you to understand that for years and years and years, he has said there is no beneficial mutations. Those two examples that he just gave, he actually said, sort of said, oh, you believe that that's a beneficial mutation? Yes, absolutely. And now he's sort of saying, oh, these beneficial mutations. Donny, you pushed back against that for ages, saying that they weren't beneficial, and here you are saying they're beneficial. I mean, it's just a complete lack of self-awareness. He would laugh at me for bringing up nylonase. Oh, but, nylon's a modern thingo, so it can't be. No, it's a beneficial mutation. It is. And I'm glad that he's been forced to actually acknowledge it. But this is incredible that he's sort of now acknowledging these beneficial mutations that he hard to the hilt said they weren't beneficial. Incredible.
We can discuss a number of mutations, Milano mutation. Okay. The point is to overcome the influx, the incredible influx of low impact, nearly neutral, slightly deleterious mutations, you're going to need hundreds to thousands of truly beneficial mutations to counterbalance the damage.
No, not true. It's because those deleterious mutations, even if they're slightly deleterious, as I said, through a number of mechanisms, including the best one is recombination. That when you have children, you have a heterozygosity that will produce different alleles for different children, right? They have different combinations of genetics. If I'm putting that kind of a bit weirdly, but I'm trying not to use technical terms. So what that means, it means that some children will have those alleles and some children won't. And then it selects against the children that do. Recombination, as I pointed out in the paper, it acts to weed out those deleterious mutations.
Okay. And the proponent of common descent, especially when they do their mathematical modeling or make their arguments and points or create their stories.
So when this is Donny who really harped on about the Basinford, I think it was the Basner and Sanford paper. You know, when they did their models, it wasn't mathematical models or stories. Like, this is the sort of coloring that he puts on it than the actual research that they're doing. It's really quite horrendous that somebody that sort of, you know, has soteriology debates and what saves you for heaven is going on about evolution as stories. The irony is palpable. It's just incredible.
They're assuming that way too many of these beneficial mutations that happen are non-reductive. When again, most of them are reductive. They're due to the elimination of pre-existing genes, pre-existing systems. They're reductive. That's not going to help you climb mountain problems.
No, like, you know, you just mentioned nylonase that had a benefit of being able to digest the nylon in their system. You just sort of, but Donny's not understanding what beneficial means. That if the system sort of, if you take away something from the system, it's not beneficial, and that's not true. So the lactase tolerance, for instance, if that takes away apart from the system that cannot digest lactase, and we now can, it doesn't mean that it's not beneficial. It absolutely is beneficial for us to be able to digest lactase. It absolutely is beneficial. But you want to basically change the meaning of the word fitness to mean, well, it has to be more complicated, or it has to add something, where I don't. As long as it's beneficial, it's beneficial. No evolutionary biologist is defining it as, oh, it has to add something. No, it doesn't. Like, that's not a thing. Why would it?
Probable, and take your fish to fisherman, or your goo to you, or your bacteria-like organism.
And he loves these quotes, the goo to you, fish to fisherman, and it's like, yeah, no, it really will. It really will. That with recombination, absolutely, it absolutely will. And, you know, we can show that it absolutely will. I don't, like, you know, this is an article of faith for Donny, and he loves trotting out these sort of statements, these catchphrases. So I'm going to start trotting out phrases like, yep, another assertion from dodgy Donny deals.
To biologists, you need truly beneficial mutations. Trade-offs aren't going to work. They're just going to result.
Yeah, so nylonase was a beautiful example. It's a truly beneficial. The citrate that in the Lenski labs, that, you know, that organism was now able to digest citrate. The Chlamydius reinhardti, the algae that became truly multicellular, that is a beneficial mutation. Like, all of these are truly beneficial, but he just wants to hand wave and say, no, they're not truly beneficial because they don't add anything, which that doesn't mean anything in biology. Like, what do you mean by add something? I don't know why the ability to digest nylonase, the nylonase, the ability to digest nylon, when you live in a nylon-rich environment, I don't know how that would be categorized as not adding anything. It's very strange. But, you know, they have their own definitions that aren't used in the scientific community. They will just make up these definitions and claim it has to happen. you know, for this to happen. I don't know why, because they're not using the actual literature of the evolutionary biologists. They're just making their own stuff up and then claiming to have some sort of scientific superiority, which is so strange.
In shrinking functional genome sizes. So, okay, not every mutation.
Yeah, it is ironic. Yes. I mean, the amount that he pushed back on me about the nylonase and lactose tolerance is just incredible. And now here he is acknowledging them as beneficial mutations, when the claim used to be there are no beneficial mutations. I don't know how somebody can have two completely diametrically opposed opinions in such a short amount of time. It's incredible.
Mutations passed on, sure, but the mutation rate is high. Again, it's 100 new mutations per person per generation.
Doesn't matter. It matters what the substitution rate is, Donny, and he never mentions this. He's been corrected on this by Dr. Dan Stone-Cardinal, who's sort of like, you need to be talking about the substitution rate, not the mutation rate. Because if those mutations are selected against and they don't make it to be fixed in the genome, then it doesn't matter. Like, this is just pure sleight of hand by Donny.
Selection can't see most of those, because selection can't see the slightly deleterious mutations. They're only seeing the big ones. It's only seeing, and natural selection.
No, that's not true, because recombination puts some of them in the lineages and doesn't put them in other lineages, right? So you have children, some of which have a lot of those mutations, some of which have almost none, some of which have, you know, a moderate amount, and then it's selected against. And that keeps happening. It keeps reiterating that. So this whole idea that, oh, it can't see them when they build up. Yes, it can. And that's a sort of article of faith by Donny as well. Like, oh, they've got to make it to the, well, why do you never talk about the substitution rate? Never does.
Selection, it's simply differential reproduction. Who's reproducing the most? Who's passing on their genes the most? Okay, so if a mutation happens that doesn't affect reproduction, then that individual, that mutant's not going to be removed from the equation.
Yes, it is. It's recombination, as I've explained. Recombination acts to break up beneficial alleles from detrimental ones. That's it. That's the entire explanation. And Donny just ignores it completely.
And so those mutations that are slightly deleterious, that evade selection, they are passed on to the next generation. They're subject to genetic.
To some of the next generation. As I said, recombination, it breaks up those deleterious mutations, focusing them on certain individuals, which are then selected against. So yeah, it's sort of this sort of faith that oh, well, they're all passed on to all of the lineages. No.
Genetic drift, and so they drift throughout the population, and that population slowly descends into overall genetic degeneration.
But that's not what we see. It's not what we see in the Lenski labs. It's not what we see with Drosophila. It's not what the models predict, because the one that he's relying on, the genetic entropy paper, and I highly recommend going to Creation Myths to see the complete overview, a lit review on Basner and Sanford. The whole point is that they misrepresented what fitness actually is. So they sort of came up with their own definition of fitness that would never have made it through. They had to publish it in the Mathematical Journal of Biology, like some obscure magazine kind of thing. Really, really weird that they went to a mathematical journal to publish an evolutionary work. But if they had published in an evolutionary journal, they probably would have picked up that they're not using the correct definition of fitness. Another thing is their beneficial mutation rate was so low to be just unrealistic, completely unrealistic. You know, you don't have to assume that they're all very beneficial, but beneficial mutations do happen. So it's sort of this, you know, and Dr. Dan Stone-Cardinal has produced a paper to refute it. Actually, I'll look at just sort of look at that paper a little kind of thing. Share this tab, and this is Back to the Fundamentals, a reply to Basner and Sanford. And again, don't take my word for it. I am not an evolutionary biologist. I'm just a dude on the internet, quite frankly. Creation myths, and I'm gonna link creation myths again. He is an actual evolutionary biologist who does understand this stuff and who does keep sort of trying to keep standing for truth honest, which is an uphill battle, to be honest with you. It is an uphill battle, but he does a really good job. His thing is a lit review, Back to the Fundamentals, where he goes over his paper and explains exactly what he means and what they found. So first off, we need to recognize conventions of terminology has changed since 1930. And he was really talking, the Basner and Sanford was really talking about Fisher's evolution equation. That, I might add, they're kind of using wrong, and they kind of have misrepresented that, maybe unintentionally, maybe by accident, but they've misrepresented. The concept of genetic variance is more to akin what we mean by additive genetic variance. So they've sort of got their own terms that they're using in the paper. Fitness of any organism is more clearly stated as mean population fitness. So they're sort of using fitness as the fitness of any individual organism. And that's not what they mean by fitness. They mean mean population fitness. So fitness overall across the population. So they've kind of made up their own terms. Now, don't worry about the math. I couldn't do the math either. That's not my field. I don't understand it. I don't think we need to. I think that the fact that they've published this and got it by evolutionary biologists is, sort of so BNS, which is an unfortunate acronym, which, to be honest with you, accurately describes the original paper, is having many simplifying but unrealistic assumptions that define the limited generality. It requires the assumption of zero dominance and zero epistasis. Zero epistasis. So epistasis is sort of where you get to a point where the expression of a gene is masked, or it's covered over by the expression of another gene, right? So basically what it means is that you can have some kind of deleterious mutation that gets overshadowed by another one, essentially, or that normal gene can be overshadowed by a sort of by a deleterious one, right? So it means that there can be the expressions of one gene that rely on the expressions of another or multiple of genes. So it's important, like, and I don't know whether so for instance, okay, so I may have a gene for brown hair, for instance, right? And that actually is overshadowed by my genetics to go bald, right? It sort of is, it's a very primitive example, and I'm not sure if it really is a good example, but that's an example of where one gene is canceling out another. So if a beneficial gene sort of has epistasis over another one, then that detrimental gene is going to be cancelled out by the beneficial one, and it may never be expressed again. It may never come to expression. So the idea that you can do a model without any epistasis at all is kind of very, very unrealistic. So despite BNS' insistence, there's no evidence that Fisher believed that fitness would increase without bound. Such a notion would lead to absurdity. So they sort of put unlimited fitness unlimited fitness gain, which I don't know how you would do that. Like what we actually see in reality is things like sharks, which increase fitness until they get to a certain point, and then they reach sort of an equilibrium with their environment. We don't see unlimited fitness gains, but for some reason sort of that's sort of what happens. So I don't know why they would think that. Apparently no one can work out why they think that, because that certainly isn't what Fisher thought. So I don't know why they thought that. The third claim is the absence of mutations. Fisher's theorem predicts a depletion of genetic variance and ultimately static fitness, and this is somehow a bug rather than a feature of the theorem. It's very strange, their interpretation of it. And also I want to so when they went and they modeled it, what they found was that there was a sort of an incredible drop in fitness for adding these detrimental mutations, but then it sort of reached a point of growing steadily. The population would grow steadily. They had a maximum size of 1,000, which is sort of just a maximum population size. And what was interesting is that when a beneficial mutation can actually lead to a reduction in population, and I'll explain how that works. Like, just say you can, a beneficial mutation is spread around that you can access some sort of food. If that population then consumes all of the food, it can actually lead to a downturn. It's very, very interesting what was done here. But like, sort of, so that the previous model was absolutely flawed. They provide a fundamentally flawed view of Fisher's theorem, and it requires clarification to avoid disinformation in the field. And to be clear, nothing we presented are novel ideas. Essentially, that is the authors, which is Cardinal and Hancock. Yep, Jackery B. Hancock. So that is essentially them saying, hey, it isn't that we're updating the theorem to work. All that we're doing is correcting what the sort of creationist side got wrong. They're not presenting anything new. All of this is very well understood. So, but again, don't take my word for it. I'm not an evolutionary biologist. Go over to Creation Myths. He's got an excellent video over there analyzing the whole thing. So this is the sort of paper, the Basner and Sanford is kind of what he is basing all of these things on, because the geneticists and evolutionary biologists, they don't think this, right? They don't go, oh, this is how the populations will act. And he never actually addresses any of this.
Let's continue here. He says, this evolutionist, it is based on something that is true. Yeah, the mutation rate's high, selection is weak, selection can't see most of these mutations.
I think selection is weak is another article of faith. Like, it really is. I don't think selection is weak.
So they're passed on. They accumulate. And by the time they accumulate to where they're noticeable, that population has descended into degeneration. What's selection going to do? Remove the entire population from the equation?
That is not what we see in the physical. That is not what we see in the experiments that have been done. Not what we see in Lenski labs. It's not what we see in Drosophila. It's not what we see in any of the experiments that we're doing. It's also not what we see when we have a more realistic model that we put it through. That's not what we see at all. And he's not. So what he's doing is conflating those mutations building up in individuals with those mutations being fixed in the population. Again, the mutation rate doesn't matter. It's the substitution rate. How much those mutations are actually getting fixed in the population. And it appears to be an article of faith for Donny that all of them get put in the population. Whereas what actually happens through recombination is some lineages will end up with those mutations and some won't. And then they're selected against. But he doesn't seem to understand that.
That's not evolution, but it's so badly misunderstood. And what I mean by that, let's say you take a room of 100 people. Everybody's multiply mutant. Okay, we've all accumulated mutations over time. Genetic entropy is the fact that every generation is just a little bit more mutant than the previous generation. I'm a little more mutant than my parents. My parents are a little bit more mutant than their grandparents. So it's that every generation, they've accumulated a little bit more mutations than the previous generation. So
Yes, but those mutations, as I showed in recombination, it breaks up the mutations and puts them mostly in some lineages and not in others. So the lineages with fewer deleterious mutations and more beneficial mutations will be selected for, and the ones with more deleterious mutations will be selected against. This is all very simple stuff, but he never talks about the substitution rate, ever. He never mentions it.
Well, that means every single human being on the planet, 8 billion people, every person's mutant. Some may be a little more mutant than another. And everybody has a highly complex mix of traits and mutations, okay? And so if you were to have a room full of 100 people, everybody's multiply mutant. So, okay, let's give the evolutionists the benefit of the doubt. Let's just be generous and say, okay, remove from that room.
Okay, thank you so much, Lieutenant Jedi, for 5 readerships. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That went out to Hunter Biden's laptops. Oh, Dr. J. Bundy got it. Well done. Good shot. Slackback got a readership. Esnell got a readership. DJ Ratgirl Tika got a readership. And NetTube User got a readership. Thank you so much, Left-Handed Jedi. And enjoy winner, chicken dinner. Yeah, look, Grayson, I'm more than happy for you to come on and correct me. As I said, I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but you know, I really want to go through some of the papers that Donny's using, and I really would love to debate this man, but you know, he seems so reluctant to even consider the idea. It's incredible.
Your 50 worst mutants, the individuals that have the most mutants in that room. Okay, so you remove 50 people. There's 50 left. You removed 50% of the most.
Could I just point out what an unrealistic example this is? Like, just unrealistic. If most of them are deleterious mutations, they will be removed, yes. But some of those will have beneficial mutations as well. And that's what he's not putting into this. He's basically saying, oh, well, they're all deleterious, they'll all add up. You know, they're mostly neutral. And a lot of them through epistasis are not actually expressed. So I don't know, like it's very, very strange the way he thinks it works.
Worse mutants. So what are you left with? Are you solving the problem? No, because now you're just left with 50 people that are more mutant than the generation before it.
It doesn't matter, because the whole point is that mutations don't necessarily have to be bad, right? That they can be beneficial and they can be weeded out over a long, like what he is starting with is a faith position that there is a genotype that is human, like the Adam and Eve, the perfect genotype that is just perfect in any way, whereas evolution doesn't work like that. It doesn't have this perfect being that gets degraded. That's not how this works. It basically has a whole bunch of mutations, most of which are pretty much neutral, slightly deleterious, and incredibly beneficial. Like he doesn't understand that we're not aiming towards some kind of perfect archetype that's just degraded over time. And what he's describing, this you know, collapse of the genetics, is not what we see over in animals with short reproductive times. It's not. And it's not what the modeling says either. It's a faith position from Donny.
Remove 75%, 80%. The point is what you're left with every time is a generation that's more mutant than the previous generation.
Yeah, but the problem that Donny's got is those people are producing more lineages, right? Where some of the mutations are in those lineages and some are not. So the deleterious ones keep getting put into individual lineages through recombination, where recombination breaks apart the alleles and the deleterious ones get put in some of the children and not in others. So he's got a really unrealistic view of how selection actually works, because he's assuming that those mutations go into every single child equally, and that is not the case. That is not what happens, right? What happens is that the children are born, some have the mutation and some don't. So he's assuming that every single one of these mutations go into every single one of these children, and that is so unrealistic. And he's been told before. He's been told about recombination before. I don't know whether he didn't hear it, didn't understand, or is just downright lying. I don't know.
So nothing can really stop this genetic degeneration. Okay, so let's continue. So no, it's not misunderstood. Those that understand this problem, and another thing too.
Yeah, Donny doesn't actually understand this problem, like, because he's been told about this, and it's not like we understand how it works. And how we think it works is what we see in the actual experimental data coming from these labs that are doing these experiments with short life cycle organisms. That's what we see. And you can sort of misrepresent the beneficial mutation rates, and you can misrepresent all of this stuff and come out with your flawed studies, but you're not changing anybody in genetics' minds, because you're not actually publishing in genetics and evolution peer-reviewed articles. You're publishing in some random maths, biological maths journal to sort of smuggle all of this stuff in, which has been thoroughly refuted by Dr. Cardinal and Zach Hancock. Thoroughly refuted. If this was wrestling, Dr. Cardinal's paper would be like a steel chair. It absolutely. I don't know Zach Hancock's credentials. I do apologize that they may be a doctor as well. I do apologize if I have misrepresented them, but this absolutely demolishes their entire case.
Is the problem's even worse when you understand that the majority of the genome's active and functional, including these so-called evolutionary leftovers and DNA elements like pseudogenes, the loose sequences, these various classes of retrotransposons. So the more functional the genome is, the bigger of a problem we have here.
The more functional the genome is, the bigger the problem. Yeah, no, I don't know why that would be. Like, the model that you're using didn't even take epistasis into consideration at all. I don't know. It's sort of no.
The conclusion is irretrievable. The conclusion's obvious. It's very simple. It's very easy. It's very clear. And that's why the evolutionists have to dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge, unfortunately.
Well, if anyone's diving, dip, ducking, and dodging, Donny, it's you not debating me, even though you say you demolish me over and over and over. Like, this is the problem. This is the hypocrisy that we see out of creationists all the time. Like, he will accuse us. And this is the thing. Nobody's avoiding, like, Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal has been in Donny's rooms explaining this to him. Like, I don't know why he would say that, because the actual experts, who I am not one of them, right? I just debate, and I enjoy debate. The actual experts have been into his room. You don't see Donny going to a university and saying, "Hey, I'm gonna take a course and find out what I know." They're all coming to him and saying, "Hey, you're wrong." But that doesn't seem to matter to him. Like, nobody is ducking and dodging. And Dr. Cardinal has put out a paper. How is he dodging exactly? Ridiculous.
And they got to run in circles. They got to be convoluted on the issue. It's just like rust on a car. The evolutionists hate this, but they hate it because it's simple, it's true, and it's a basic illustration that most people can understand. But you're going to have to be mostly not understandable if you want to try and deceive people into believing that they're related to banana plants.
No, they're not understandable because it's incredibly complex. As I showed in the paper, the math is incredibly complex. I couldn't do the math. I know that I can't do that math. Let's have a look at it. This is the price equation. This is the kind of modeling that they're doing. It's sort of like going, it's incredibly complex. They're just trying to fool people. Are physicists trying to fool people, Donny? Is that what's happening? Because that's incredibly complex, and I don't understand it as well. Are physicists doing that? Are rocket scientists trying to fool people, Donny? Is this what's happening? If something's complex, they're trying to fool people. Ridiculous. Absolutely ludicrous statement. I don't know why anybody would ever say that. Like, if it's complex, they're trying to fool you. What a nonsensical statement.
Because of deleterious mutation accumulation, selection, and gene flow, and epigenetics, and so on and so forth. Okay, none of those things are going to help take a bacteria-like organism into a whale over time. Way too much novelty and increasing.
Yeah, this is just an argument from incredulity. That's all it is. And he uses this analogy, and something I do have to point out, Donny uses the worst analogies I have heard next to Hovind. Hovind's got worse, but Donny's a close second, because this rust on a car, right? Like, yeah, rust accumulates on a car, but what we don't see is cars mating with other cars, and some of those cars having a lot of rust and some having very little rust. And then that happening again and again and again. That's what we don't see, Donny. And where's the beneficial? And, you know, sometimes that one car will come out with a resistance to rust. It's beneficial. Like, it's just so ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. He's a Hovind fanboy. Yeah, I actually, just while I'm here, and just to sort of tap on the ridiculousness of, I don't know why he's so sort of fanboying over Hovind. I really do not. I really do not. But I want to give credit to Big Bad Mama for this. I'll get Big Bad Mama's YouTube page, because they've been, Big Bad Mama I absolutely adore, and they've been doing a lot of things like you know, showing who Kent Hovind actually is, and doing a lot of shorts and snippets that show exactly who he is. He's actually been doing a lot of political stuff as well, which is really good. And so I'm a big fan of Big Bad Mama. But I came across a Hovind clip that you have got to see to believe. Like, you've got to see to believe. And this is, so Donny's basically, he has this albatross, which is Hovind, who Hovind brings in most of his money, but Hovind is a complete wackadoodle. Yeah, that's a technical term, by the way. Hovind is so weird. Let me share this. This is Hovind. Let me share this for a second.
Should Christians vote in elections? This is a very difficult question to answer. I will say yes, but there's a much bigger picture here. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are running for president of what? It's a corporation called the United States. The real United States has not had a president since Abe Lincoln. That's a real can of worms you can open up, go down that rabbit trail. How many?
Okay, so this is recently, and courtesy of Big Bad Mama, this is sovereign citizen talk. USA is a corporation. Listen to what he says.
For United States are there? Is it capital U, capital S, small u, capital S? One's a corporation, folks, and they're running for the president of the corporation. So that's a long, interesting rabbit trail. Go ahead.
Screen isn't frozen. Yeah. So this US is a corporation. The capital U, capital S is a corporation, while the small lowercase US, that's sovereign citizen and sort of, you know, tax protester talk. That they go on to sort of say, hey, you know, I don't owe taxes because it's a corporation and it's this corporate entity, which is just nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
I think the global warming is mostly a hoax to try to get more government control over everybody's, you know, you got to get permission to light a match someday, you know. And I really think they've got weather modification down to where they can steer hurricanes and maybe even create them. I can't prove that. I just suspect that is true.
He thinks that they can steer hurricanes. So this came from Marjorie Taylor Greene, saying that the hurricane was caused by the Democrats and Kamala Harris to sort of cause a hurricane and then rescue the people, making them look good for the election. This is the kind of idiocy. This is like, Hovind is a dangerous conspiracy theorist. There's no doubt about it. He's a sovereign citizen. He's a tax protester. He still believes this nonsense about sort of the US isn't a government. It is a corporation that has, you know, we haven't had a real government since Lincoln. What nonsense statement. Like, it's just a conspiracy theory. And this is the kind of person that Donny turns to for his information. Like, ridiculous. Ridiculous. Oh, hey, how you doing? Good to see you. Good to see you. My good friend, Destroyed.
Phenotypic complexity would have to occur that's simply not observable. And so we see species hitting walls. we see variation and adaptation and speciation due to shifts in heterozygosity to homozygosity. That's a reduction in allelic variability. Okay, so
well, homozygosity is so difference between heterozygosity and homozygosity. Heterozygosity means that you have two different genes from the parents, right? They're not the same allele, basically. They're not the same. Homozygosity means that they are the same. So, for instance, you have two people with the same gene for red hair, for instance. You know, you see a lot of stuff like that. But, you know, I don't know why that's a problem. Because if they're if it is a case of homozygosity and it is deleterious, then it will pile up in all of the descendants and that lineage will be selected against. So I don't see the problem there. You know, you're sort of assuming that all of these are fixed and every single one of the children will get every single mutation, which is not true, as I've showed. But Donny never addresses recombination.
So we do see change, but the change is horizontal. It's not vertical. The change is simply not the kind of change that proponents of common descent and fish-to-fisherman evolution require.
It is. I mean, like you basically, and I've sort of said this before to people. They're sort of saying, where's the evidence for fish to fisherman, right? And it's sort of like, well, we don't need to see that. We use induction for that. So no one's ever observed Pluto make a complete circuit around the sun. No one's ever observed that. It takes a long, long, long time. Length of time, I can't remember the exact amount of years. Yeah, 247 years. So no one's ever seen that directly make a complete circuit. We've only ever seen Pluto in a position, right? Because no one can live that long. But what we can do is observe, and Pluto was only discovered in less time than that. So, but we know that Pluto will make a circuit of the sun. We know from the way that it is projected out that it will happen. Even though this is the thing of the creationists, they kind of go, well, if we can't observe it directly, you know, and that leads into the, well, were you there? Did you show the Hovind clip? Did everybody see that Hovind clip? I definitely showed it. I mean, I can show it again. It's quite hilarious, actually, I got to say. I can show it again. Think it was your internet? Okay, well, let me know if there's problems on my end. I do want to correct it. I can show it again though. Let's show it again. Let's show it again. Why not?
Should Christians vote in elections? It's a very difficult question to answer. I will say yes, but there's a much bigger picture here. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are running for president of what? It's a corporation called the United States. The real United States has not had a president since Abe Lincoln. That's a real can of worms you can open up, go down that rabbit trail. How many different United States are there? Is it capital U, capital S, small u, capital S? It's one's a corporation, folks. And they're running for the president of the corporation. So that's a long, interesting rabbit trail. Go ahead. I think the global warming is mostly a hoax to try to get more government control over everybody's, you know, you got to get permission to light a match someday, you know. And I really think they've got weather modification down to where they can steer hurricanes and maybe even create them. I can't prove that. I just suspect that is true.
Yeah, so he's believed the conspiracy theory that they've created the hurricane in order to win the election. It's so bafflingly bad. And IC Spin, thank you so much. $1.99 from IC Spin. Thank you. I really appreciate it. That's awesome. And you're welcome. You're welcome. Look, that blew me away because I knew that Kent Hovind used to be a conspiracy nutbag, sovereign citizen, tax protester, all of these things. I've got a video of him going through how you are not the name that the government has for you because yours is in uppercase letters kind of thing, that kind of sovereign citizen nonsense. Him going through it with somebody. But he still believes the same thing, that the government of the United States is not valid. It's a corporation. All of this stuff is absolute sovereign citizen nonsense. And this is who Donny thinks is an expert on his, evolution, even though Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal was in there the other day and he doesn't understand the most basic terminology in evolution. Like, he just doesn't understand it.
So it's time that the evolutionists tap out and convert to the biblical creation model, because it's biblical creationists that are making the best predictions, retrodictions on.
This is a man whose channel is standing for truth. He thinks that the creationists are making the best predictions, even though they've just had their sort of lifeline of a paper absolutely steel-chaired by Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal, absolutely destroyed by him, and they sort of want to say, oh, the evolutionists should turn to creationism. So here's the thing, logically, right? And this is a flaw in Buddy's logic here, that even if evolution is designed, even if they could prove that, which they're not even close to doing, what they don't want to do is actually show that it's designed, right? Because none of this addresses whether it's designed or not. It is just saying, well, I don't believe evolution, mostly because they have a misunderstanding of how it works. But even if you could show that the cells were designed, it doesn't get you to a god, right? Show that aliens didn't come in and do it. Show that magic wasn't responsible for it. Like, this is the thing. Even if you manage to cut down evolution, it still doesn't get you to a god. You've got to show that God was responsible. And the whole thing about a deductive argument is that you have to eliminate all possibilities. And in some possible world, it could have been magic. In some possible world, it could have been aliens. In some, you haven't actually gotten to a god at that point. And you're nowhere near, like, this faith belief that they have, that people are turning away from evolution rather than making it the basis for modern medicine and genetics going forward, is just such a faith position. And it's sort of, I don't know why Donny takes this position. It's really just, I'm amazed he can make it through this sentence without blushing.
These issues. So Rusty Walker says, selection is a mechanism that keeps a species as strong reproductively fit. Yeah, exactly. Natural selection simply keeps a species as strong as it can be. That's it.
Yeah.
It sees the big mutations, you get.
Yeah, so this is a misunderstanding by Basner and Sandford, that they think that fitness is this sort of unbounded thing. It will just keep multiplying. No, that's not what Fisher actually said. So it's a misunderstanding of theirs. They misunderstood that Fisher's theorem and what it actually said. No one's claiming that fitness is unbounded.
The zebra in the wild, it's born with one leg that's a little shorter than the other. So you know what? Selection's probably going to remove that zebra from the equation.
Yes.
As it's not going to be able to run very fast, as it's got a defected leg. And so it's going to be first for dinner. So yeah, selection can see the big mutations, might be able to amplify your best beneficial.
But recombination puts a lot of detrimental mutations in some lineages. That's what is missing.
Mutation, but it's powerless to stop the low impact, the nearly neutral. See, why they're called nearly neutral is because they're neutral, which means they're neutral to selection. Selection can't see them. So they're going to build up over time, but they're nearly neutral because it turns out they're actually slightly deleterious, like rust on a car. Going back to this illustration that the evolutionists love so much, it's like rust on a car. Single rust molecules on their own, they're barely noticeable. They're inconsequential on their own, but over time they build up to the point where they're destructive.
Yes, but what a car doesn't do is mate with other cars and produce some cars with a lot of rust and some cars with almost no rust. Show me that, Donny. Show me the cars mating and producing various combinations of amounts of rust. Show me that. This is absolutely tragic that he doesn't understand why this car analogy is terrible.
just like a single spelling mistake in a book the size of an encyclopedia. On their own, these typographical errors, they are inconsequential, barely noticeable. But as they accumulate over time, sure, the book becomes more diverse, right? Because you're getting all these mistakes, these typographical errors, it's altering the text, but it's actually creating a muddled book. It's a confusing read. It's a degraded version of the original book before.
Again, books are not mating. I don't even know why, you know, these analogies, like I said, he has got the second worst analogies ever, because what's not happening is the books aren't mating, producing lineages, some with a ton of errors that it's almost incomprehensible, and some with almost, why, like he's been told this again and again and again ad nauseum, and still refuses to stop using these terrible analogies. It's baffling. At this point, I just have to say, yeah, you're being dishonest. Like, because unless you can show the books mating and then some getting a lot of typographical errors and some getting fewer like, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's incredible. And some of them, because here's the thing, some of them are better off because they have beneficial mutations. He thinks that there is an original book that is perfect, and that's not the case. That's not the case. It's so baffling that he thinks that there's an original book in biology. Like, there's no original thing that it's trying to work towards or getting further away from. The beneficial mutations make the fitness go up. That's it.
The original book had started to accumulate typographical errors. And so it's as simple as that, like single spelling mistakes in a book and rust on a car. These things build up, they degrade, they destroy. They're very harmful. So sure, that's all selection is. It's going to keep a species as strong as it can be, Rusty Walker. Let's see.
Well, it'll get equilibrium with the environment, like when pressures are no longer working on it. And if there are a buildup of deleterious mutations, the pressures will work on it again. Like I pointed out in that example in Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal's paper, if you get a beneficial mutation that leads to them being able to reproduce to access a food supply, for instance, they're going to exhaust that food supply and they're going to be kept down by that. Like, this whole idea is sort of really, really, it's not realistic what Donny is saying here. And his analogies are certainly not realistic.
As it can be within the niche that it currently occupies. Exactly. And so those environmental niche that a specific animal is in is not going to help to solve this problem. Because again, those species are just going to be as strong as they can be as they accumulate generation after generation, more and more deleterious mutations. I wanted to go over a couple slides here.
No, because you're assuming that every single child is going to, inherit every single mutation. And just because they inherit mutations doesn't mean that they're fixed. Like, he does not go into substitution rate. What's the substitution rate? You won't mention it. You won't talk about it. You won't even consider it for a second, because he doesn't want to.
Most mutations are harmful, yet not harmful to be removed from the population by selection. That's genetic entropy in a nutshell. Okay.
Yeah. So this is from Sandford's paper, Sandford and Basner, that Dr. Cardinal has already ripped to pieces. Absolutely ripped to pieces. It's shredded. It's nonsense. Again, I really, really recommend Creation Myths for a very detailed, in-depth overview of why Basner and Sandford were wrong and had to publish in the Mathematical Journal of Biology instead of an evolutionary journal. They had to get these problems past the people. So as been pointed out, if it was geneticists or evolutionary biologists reviewing this paper, they probably would have picked up on these mistakes. But because it was a mathematical journal, they didn't. But the refutation has been published. Highly recommend.
Not harmful to be removed from the population by selection. That's genetic entropy in a nutshell. Okay. The vast majority of mutations are lost to drift, but some survive and increase in frequency within the population. So every single generation, as time goes on, they increase more and more, and that population therefore descends more and more into genetic sickness. Now, inbreeding reveals the hidden reservoir of genetic mistakes.
Inbreeding, no, it doesn't. No, because with inbreeding you get a lot of homozygosity. You have the same alleles coming from both parents. It's actually sort of what happens when there is insufficient recombination throughout the population. Like it's basically what you are doing is ignoring one of the fundamental principles of evolution, and then saying, well, inbreeding, which is basically the same as ignoring it, shows us what will happen. Well, yeah, you're ignoring it, Donny. It's ridiculous.
And so we can actually get a sneak preview into genetic degeneration. You can look at it as microgenetic entropy. We see this in these.
So without genetic diversity, right, we don't get the amount of recombination. As the paper I showed said, a lack of recombination is what drives these problems. Like there is less of this happening. So he's basically pointing to a problem within not enough genetic diversity and saying, oh, well, that's going to happen to the entire population, ignoring that recombination is there entirely.
Inbred populations in the past, like Neanderthals, mammoths are a good example, Hobbit, right? Homo floresiensis. And so that's microgenetic entropy. View it as that.
Microgenetic entropy. Well, you know, if we're just making crap up, why don't you just go, like, this is the thing, they just make up terms. Nobody thinks that genetic entropy is not a thing. It's not. It's pseudoscience. It's conspiracy theory. It's something they made up and have been thoroughly refuted on, yet they still bang that drum because Donny Deals has got to, you know, bang that drum on genetic entropy, which is pseudoscience. And he's pointing to a lack of the ability to perform recombination as the problem. Yeah, it's a problem. But in natural populations, we don't have that. Like in the usual course of evolution, we don't have that.
Genetic entropy is what happens over time in large populations. Like in the human population right now, there are countless deleterious mutations. There's an increase in diseases and mutation-related diseases, to be specific. This becomes systematic once mutation fixation equilibrium is reached. And so I've written with a co-author a technical paper on mutation fixation equilibrium. Genetic drift in no way solves the mutational load paradox.
Yeah, technical paper. Have you published that paper, Donny? Have you put it up for peer review? Bet you haven't. Bet you haven't. If so, give me the citation for it. There's a reason why he doesn't cite this technical paper. He doesn't want anyone to look at it, and probably unsurprisingly.
Drift only makes the problem worse. So those that have tried to look to drift to save the day for evolution have failed.
Well, genetic drift is sort of just random events occurring. And so genetic drift is kind of just, it doesn't really help or hinder the problem. Genetic drift is really the random sort of things being taken out of the genetic pool. It doesn't really help nor hinder anything. I don't know why it would. It's very strange. It's these faith statements that he has on, you know, where there's incredulity that it sort of, you know, yeah.
It means that many deleterious mutations will randomly drift to fixation, locking in harmful mutations. So according to the evolutionary model, you have thousands of years with the human populations in a small population. So right now, fixation is slower, right? Almost no mutations are becoming fixed.
Why is fixation slower now? What is the substitution rate? What is the substitution rate? The Donny Deals is silent.
You got 8 billion people are spread out over the globe. But according to the evolutionary model, for thousands of years, you go back to the out of Africa scenario, you have the human population existing in a smaller populations and a high mutation rate, so mutations are entering the population.
It doesn't matter. It matters what the substitution rate is. And Donny should know this because he's been corrected on this again and again and again and again. So at this point, I can only assume that he is lying.
But the population's smaller. So mutations can drift to fixation quicker. Fixation just means to be stuck in place. That allele gets stuck in place at that genetic location, and every single individual in the population has it. Okay, so these mutations are slightly deleterious. They enter the population, the next generation.
No, they don't. Not all of them. This is the thing. Not even like, and you've got to weigh the beneficial mutations. You know, now, even though he accepted beneficial mutations, he's completely avoiding them now. He won't talk about them. He accepted nylonase, which he adamantly said for a long time wasn't a beneficial mutation. He accepted lactose tolerance, another one that I've brought up to him. Those two are ones that I myself have brought up to him. And he up and down said, oh, no, those aren't beneficial mutations. No, there are no beneficial mutations. Now he's saying, hey, they're beneficial. But he really doesn't want to talk about the beneficial mutations.
100 new mutations per person per generation.
There's doesn't matter what's the substitution rate, not the mutation rate. Like, so mutations can happen in large numbers. If they're not getting fixed in the population, they're being selected against. And Donny has been told this over and over and over.
Subject to genetic drift because selection can't see them. And so over time, they drift to fixation. Now selection really can't do anything about the problem because that deleterious mutation is now fixed. It's stuck in place. Every single individual in the population has it. And so what that is irreversible and irreparable genetic damage.
Yeah, but sort of nearly neutral that have benefits also drift to fixation, Donny. Where's taking that into account? No, we're not gonna talk about that.
Damage. And so fixation equilibrium precludes evolutionary theory. It means humans did not evolve from ape-like ancestors. Fixation equilibrium to this day is a challenge. It's a problem that has not been sufficiently addressed. So here's right from the secular literature. Michael Lynch, Mutation in Human Exceptionalism, Our Future Genetic Load. On average, a newborn has 100 de novo mutations.
Okay, so first off, and this is the part that I really wanted to get to, Mutation in Human Exceptionalism, Our Future Genetic Load. Okay, so let's look at that. Let's look at that paper. So this is Michael Lynch. It's a 2000. I don't know when was it. It's 2016. Cool. So share this tab. Okay, so this is the abstract. I'll go through it a little bit, and I won't go into much detail. So don't worry, you're not going to get like incomprehensible stuff. Although the human germline mutation rate is higher than any other well-studied species, the rate is not exceptional once the effective genome size and effective population size are taken into consideration. Yes, so the mutation rate isn't that high compared to other species, and it's not the substitution rate. It's not how much those are being fixed in the population. What's exceptional about the humans is the recent detachment from the challenges of the natural environment and the ability to modify phenotypic traits in ways that mitigate the fitness effects of mutations. For example, precision and personalized medicine. So Donny's trying to make this seem like, oh, it couldn't have happened in nature because there's too many mutations and they get fixed in the population too much. What this paper is actually saying is that we've changed the selection criteria through medicine. Okay, it's not talking about animals in the wild. It's not talking, as Donny says, out of Africa. It's not talking about that. It's quote mined. And this is the stuff that he does ad nauseum. He will quote mine stuff. He will cherry pick stuff throughout a paper like this. Right? The molecular spectrum is the key to long-term genome stability and evolutionary flexibility, and it's asking questions. It's not saying it's definitely going to go down. So let's go to the thing. So it's really talking about the decreases in performance through technologically advancement, right? It's not talking about populations in the wild, as it were. It's really talking about, how will modern medicine affect the fitness selection of the population of humans specifically, because humans are the ones with precision medicine and, you know, able to compensate for this other genetic sort of genetic illnesses and things like that. So if selection is soft in the sense that performance is simply measuring at the moving mean, physical defects in bottom cancer, metabolic disease, and psychiatric disorders have very real costs regardless of this. So it's really talking about modern humans, but he quote mines it. He basically says, oh, but it says there's so many deleterious mutations going into the population. Yeah, because they're not being selected against. And this is what the paper says, that modern medicine would, like, you know, somebody may have a genetic cancer, you know, they might have cancer rates. That person would be selected against in the wild, but due to current medical advancements, it's not selected against. That's what the paper is saying. And it's asking the question, what do we have to do to compensate for that? Like, it's absolutely dishonest to sort of say this paper is saying that evolution isn't real because there's too many mutations going into the population, deleterious mutations, when it specifically is talking about technological advancement. And that's why it's mutation at human exceptionalism, right? This results in a relaxation of selection against mildly deleterious mutations, including the magnifying the mutation rate itself, right? So that is what it's talking about. It's talking, like, the paper actually refutes Donny. It actually, the paper that he quote mines refutes him, because it says that precision and personalized medicine results in a relaxation of selection against mildly deleterious mutation. That suggests that mildly deleterious mutations have selection mechanisms. It refutes him. It actually refutes him. His own citation, which you'll see happens a lot to Donny.
Genetic load. On average, a newborn has 100 de novo mutations. So that's,
yeah, but that's not the substitution rate. And the substitution rate, what gets fixed in the human population, is changing due to modern medicine. And that's what the paper is about, not what Donny's trying to cherry pick from it. And I hope I showed that sufficiently. That is a gross cherry pick, like just one of the most grotesque cherry picks I've ever seen in my life. Absolutely disgusting. The vast majority are deleterious.
It's 100 new mutations per person per generation. Notice this, right from the conventional literature. In summary, the vast majority of mutations are deleterious. This is...
Okay. This is towards realistic affecting fitness. Yep. So this is a 2002 paper, University of Edinburgh, Knightley and Lynch. So this is a tiny little article in a evolutionary journal, right? And he's just gotten the back end of it. In summary, the vast mutations are deleterious, supported by both molecular and quantitative genetic data. This provides an explanation of many key genetic properties of natural and laboratory populations. Yes, but that is not the substitution rate. That is not the substitution rate. So he talks about Shaw et al. Imply that previous analysis failed to allow for bidirectional mutations. The methods to indicate the proportion of beneficial mutations in MA experiments have been developed and applied. By example, reflecting, so by fitting a reflected gamma distribution model from data from C, the ML estimate for the proportion of affected mutations was bound to be 0 with an upper limit of 28%. These earlier approaches assumed reflective gamma distribution and in preference to the placement gamma. So basically, they're just correcting something on like whether mutations are deleterious or not. It doesn't go into like this. This doesn't say that those mutations all will hit the population. It doesn't say that most of them will be fixed. It doesn't say anything that Donny's trying to make it say. All he said is the vast majority of mutations are deleterious. But not only are they deleterious, they're nearly neutral. You know, vastly deleterious ones don't usually happen, as well as vastly beneficial ones. Most of them are nearly neutral. There's nothing in here that supports what Donny is saying. Absolutely nothing. And, you know, you can see it's a tiny article. Tiny article. More direct evidence comes from spontaneous MA experiments in Drosophila. That's the fruit fly. Yes, and those fruit flies, they're maintaining their population. If what Donny is saying is true, the Drosophila experiments would just fail. I don't know why he has this faith position that mutations equal substitution rate. I don't know. He's been corrected so many times. Yeah, and it's funny that every time, you know, somebody gives him an answer, it's a rescue device. This is just sort of semantics and bloviating. It really is just a matter of faith that any answer that ruins him is just a rescue device. He used to say the same about nylonase and things like that. He used to say, oh, you know, you've got this rescue device. Come on, seriously? And now he's saying that nylonase is a beneficial mutation. Well, that's a flip. That's an absolute flip. So this is the 1979 paper by Motu Kimura, just a legend in genetics and evolutionary biology. A lot of it is very dense mathematics and things. By assuming a specific mathematical form of division, and he's talking about Otar's paper, assumed to be deleterious, and the selection coefficients against individual mutants follow exponential distribution. With this model, she showed that the level of heterozygosity reaches an upper limit. So what does that mean? It means that basically it reaches an upper limit of differences in alleles. So the rate of evolution per generation in terms of mutant substitutions is inversely proportional to the effective population size. What does that mean? Right? It means as the population gets bigger, the number of mutations goes down. That's essentially what it means. And that's what we saw in the other paper, which says that the mutations are offset by the population size of humans. We have a large mutation rate. However, it's offset by the size of the population, because the larger the population, the less the substitution rate, the less that those things are being fixed in the population, which we can see because, as he said, like you see this in inbreeding. Yeah, if the population is small, you will get more you'll get things fixed more. But the more the population, the less it gets fixed. So he does not talk about the substitution rate, which is actually the detrimental mutations being fixed in the population. So, and he's really talking about like correcting a model. And here's where he's taking it from. Finally, there's one biological problem we have to consider. Under the present model, effectively neutral, but in fact slightly deleterious mutants accumulate continuously in every species. The selective disadvantages of such mutants in terms of individual survival and Darwinian fitness is likely to be the order of 10 to the power of -5 or less. So that's sort of the selected disadvantage. But with a 10 to the 4 loci per genome coding for various proteins, accumulating mutants at a rate of 10 to the power of -6 per generation. The rate of loss of fitness per generation may amount to 10 to the power of -7 per generation. Whether such a small rate of deterioration in fitness constitutes a threat to the survival and welfare of the species, not to the individual, is a moot point. but this will easily be taken care of by the adaptive gene substitutions that must occur from time to time, say once every few hundred generations. What is it saying? It's saying that those deleterious mutations will be overshadowed by an occasional very, very, very beneficial mutation. That's what it's saying. But, Donny's not going to show where he's saying, hey, it's a problem, but it'll be outweighed by this other thing. And don't forget, our understanding of genetics and evolution has come a long way since 1979. Yeah, that's literally, what, 50, almost 50 years ago, 45 years ago, 45 years ago. Okay. So yeah, this is kind of just, again, cherry picking dodgy Donny the cherry picker. It's incredible. So the thing that Donny's also doing is not weighing in the beneficial mutations. As Kamira pointed out in his paper, it will be outweighed by the beneficial mutations. That's it. But he doesn't mention that. And of course he doesn't mention that. He doesn't mention that Kimura didn't sort of, believe him. Like he's just making Kimura's conclusions for him, which he didn't actually believe. And he puts very, very succinctly that it's a moot point because it's outweighed by the beneficial mutations. So way to misrepresent a paper.
Proposing solutions. People aren't going to propose a solution for something that doesn't exist. So yes, the problem exists. Many in the evolutionary camp believe that these rescue mechanisms have saved the day.
It's not a rescue mechanism. These are actual mechanisms that actually work. And if they were rescue mechanisms, what we would see is the populations of short life cycle species like Drosophila, like bacteria, these short life cycle organisms, we would see genetic entropy destroying their populations, and we don't. So it's not a rescue mechanism. It's actually what we see in real life.
Have answered this challenge, but in reality, they haven't. They haven't actually solved this challenge. And so the challenge is still there. The problem is there to be solved. The best that they've offered have simply failed.
Yeah, Donny's been told again and again. He's had this explained to him again and again and again. This is just pontificating, bloviating. It's semantics. It's sort of just, it's just him saying stuff that he's got no idea about.
Notice this. Douglas Fatuma, Population Genetics textbook. Notice what he says. The great majority of these mutations.
Yeah, so I couldn't access this one. It's a genetics textbook. But, dollars to donuts that the guy never says that evolution's not a thing in the evolution textbook. This is another cherry pick by Donny. We know this is his MO. He goes through, finds a quote out of a textbook or a paper and tries to use it to say, hey, they don't believe in evolution. No, he doesn't. He knows his audience will never go and check out that actual paper or the textbook or anything like it. But yeah, I couldn't access this one because it is a textbook and I'd have to buy it, and I can't afford to buy every book that Donny cherry picks from, because wow, that would be one hell of a library, right?
That are fixed are effectively neutral with respect to fitness and are fixed by genetic drift. Fatuma says, since on average it will take 4 NE generations for such mutations to reach fixation, so in long-term evolutionary timescale, you have fixation equilibrium, which is a major challenge to the evolutionary model. Notice what he says. Basic population genetics. The same number of neutral mutations should be fixed. Now, the evolutionary community, these population geneticists, are going to assume that a lot of these mutations are absolutely neutral, when in fact, no, they're nearly neutral. So the problem's huge. It's massive. Because now you got nearly neutral mutations becoming.
Yeah, but look at what it says. The same number of neutral mutations should be fixed every generation. The rate of fixed of mutations is theoretically constant and equals the neutral mutation rate. So it's not sort of saying, hey, it's definitely the same rate, and it's certainly not saying it's the mutation rate. Mutation rate is not substitution rate. So the mutation rate is how many mutations arise. The substitution rate is how often those are fixed in the population. And sort of, it's absolutely shameful that he's trying to conflate the two things.
Fixed every generation. The rate of fixation of mutations is theoretically constant. Notice this, and equals the neutral mutation rate. So if the neutral mutation rate is 50 mutations, that means the fixation rate's also 50 mutations, because over a long period of time, that's how many mutations are becoming fixed every generation, which means that is irreversible and irreparable damage every single generation. This is a huge problem for those that want to believe in evolution.
Well, no, it's not irreparable damage, because those sections, they can have mutations as well. Like this is a faith position of Donny, that he thinks that there is one idealized form that we're drifting away from. Adam and Eve was this perfect genome that we're just corrupting over time, and evolution doesn't work that way. There is no perfect genome. There's no perfect being that we're moving away from. We're just mutating, we're just evolving, that's all. It's not what he thinks it is. But it's a faith-based position where he thinks that Adam and Eve were this perfect genome and we're moving away from it. It's just faith-based, that's all it is.
Standard population genetics theory teaches that the rate of fixation of neutral mutations, which includes effectively neutral mutations, very slightly delicate.
Yeah, so this he has no citation for. This is just stuff that he's sort of taking from a textbook. I don't know the details of that textbook, but he sort of adds stuff on the end. Yeah, so 2005, which is 20 years ago, a 20-year-old textbook. I wonder why he's not taking from a modern textbook. Why are you going to something that's 20 years old, Donny? 20 years old. Yeah, so this is sort of just them taking a quote mine and making his own statements. This is not what the textbook says. This is the systematic decline. This is Donny adding stuff. So what he's done here, and I'll show you what he's doing, he's basically taking a quote mine from a book where he's got this, and then he's adding his own opinion to the end of it. In the hope that
genetics theory teaches that the
people think it's coming from the book. This isn't coming from this is crap that Donny has made up. This is his own work. This is nothing that the book says. So you can just ignore this as Donny's faith. And that's about it. So as we've seen, Donny is really, like, these quote mines are really problematic. Like, he won't publish papers because he absolutely knows. He's written a technical paper. Yeah, is it published? Did you publish it at all in any way? No. Yeah, so he basically created, like, quote mine this book, got one section out of it with no context, and I would love to see the book, but as I said, if I bought every book that Donny quote mined, I would be broke. I would have no money whatsoever. So I can't afford to do that. But we can see from the previous papers how Donny's quote mined what he wants from that paper, ignoring all of the rest, and especially the conclusions that those geneticists and evolutionary biologists have to offer. This whole idea of come over to God because, evolutionary biology doesn't have an answer for this. They do. It's just he refuses to listen and then calls it rescue devices. When what we see in actual populations of short life cycle species is what the evolutionary biologists are saying. So, it's so, I don't know. And this whole idea that if evolution is wrong, it must be creationism. Who says? Has Donny ever once presented any evidence whatsoever for creationism? Ever? No. Where's the evidence for creationism? Like, this is the thing that I pointed out when I was last in his room. He expects us to have every single process of every single cell of every single mechanism of evolution, and I'm supposed to know it down to the fundamental cells, what they're doing and how it was, every single process. What does he actually show about creationism? Nothing. He just says, hey, you should believe in it because God. How was it done? God. What's the process in which this creationism, how does it work? God. Could you imagine if he said, well, what's the process of how these are selected against? And I said, evolution. And that's my entire answer. Evolution. He would basically go, no, you don't have an answer. Well, I'm going to say to Donny, you don't have an answer because God isn't an answer. You can't just say God to everything and that explains it, because it literally explains nothing. Why does God do these? Endosymbiosis. Why does God make one organism eat another and suddenly they're both part of one organism in symbiosis? Oh, because God decided to. Why does, with ERVs, that question, why does God design something to look exactly like an endogenous retrovirus? Because God. It's a nonsense. It's a nothing answer where we're expected to provide every single little granule of every single little process. And if they find a problem, even though it's not a real problem, they're like, oh, they're just rescuing it and stuff. God is the ultimate rescue device. It is. I'm going to say it right here. God is the ultimate rescue device because you don't have to explain anything. You don't have to do any experiments. You don't even have to back up what you're saying. You can just say God. How did everything get around to the biogeography it is today? God. Why is there no genetic bottlenecks for these creatures coming off the ark? Because God. The ultimate rescue device. So it's ironic, and I want to see some ironies in chat. It is ironic that he talks about rescue devices where he has the original and greatest rescue device ever known to man. God done it. Talk about a rescue device. Wow. Yeah, God is a creationist golden parachute. Absolutely. So yeah, that's just giving Donny a hard time because I mean, it didn't irk me that much, but it did irk me a little that Donny's sort of saying, he demolishes me and stuff when he won't even get into a debate. And again, I don't want you to hassle him or anybody associated with him. I just find it odd that somebody that is beating their chest so hard about demolishing everybody won't actually enter a debate with them. I don't know why. I don't know why, if you're so good and you have such good answers, why you wouldn't debate somebody about it. Like, why? I don't know. But, he's over there making his money, I guess. I don't know. It's baffling. But, all of these points, multiple, Erica Gutsick Gibbon has commented on it. Has explained it to him. Dr. Cardinal has explained it to him. It's difficult to believe that he thinks that they're just rescue devices, since all of these highly intelligent, highly professional experts on the subject have actually explained it to him. And I see Big Bad Mama in the chat. I did use a clip of yours, Big Bad Mama, because I found it hilarious. And screw it, we're going to watch it one more time because it's just so good. It's just so good. And I did link your channel earlier, so don't think that I didn't. I absolutely did. And I will again because I have it here. Redefine living. Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed, though. I would want to have. I would want to Mark Reed versus Redefine Living. Yes, but I don't want a moderator that'll just let him. So Redefine Living is basically going around saying Mark Reed won't debate me, or Mark Reed has blocked me on his channel because he doesn't have any answers and he can't address me and he can't, this kind of chess betting. No, I've blocked Redefine Living on my channel because he's rude, obnoxious, insulted people, and generally being a complete and utter, let's face it, a jackass on my channel. And so that's why he got blocked. He's very welcome as everybody who's blocked on my channel, which is a very, very small amount of people, actually. If you write me an email explaining why I should unblock you and the behavior that you'll exhibit once you're unblocked, if you say, hey, I agree to not to insult people and do any of that stuff, then I would probably unblock you. Go for it. He's fully welcome to do that. He won't, because he has an ego the size of a planet and is really rude, condescending, and insulting to people. Like, I don't block people willy-nilly. It's just he was being absolutely insulting. Just calling people names that sort of, from the way that I've seen him get utterly outraged and mad, I would probably want there to be a moderator capable of, laying down the law as far as he's concerned, because I don't. He seems to be one like C Science, who's also blocked from my channel for being insulting and rude. They don't seem to be able to control themselves. That they will start out with some modicum of control, and they'll just lose the plot at some point. So I really would like there to be a neutral moderator that I can rely on, not letting Redefine Living talk over the top of people. Because that's a big one that he does. He just talks nonstop over people and won't let them talk. That's not, it's hard to give answers when someone's talking over the top of you and will not let you speak. But this is from Big Bad Mama. I think I linked you. Yeah, I did link you. Okay, cool. So Big Bad Mama for the win. Look, I love this. I wish I could have liked it 100 times and that would work. I really do, because this was amazing. Let's just watch it one more time for the road, because hilarious. And this is Donny's expert. This is the person he relies on most for his evolutionary content. This is the man.
Should Christians vote in elections? This is a very difficult question to answer. I will say yes, but there's a much bigger picture here. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are running for president of what? It's a corporation called the United States. The real United States has not had a president since Abe Lincoln. That's a real can of worms you can open up, go down that rabbit trail. How many different United States are there? Is it capital U, capital S, small u, capital S? It's one's a corporation, folks. And they're running for the president of the corporation. So that's a long, interesting rabbit trail. Go ahead. I think the global warming is mostly a hoax to try to get more government control over everybody's, you got to get permission to light a match someday, And I really think they've got weather modification down to where they can steer hurricanes and maybe even create them. I can't prove that. I just suspect that is true.
Yeah, this is the evolution guy on Donny's channel. This is his man. They can steer hurricanes and probably create them. I think that. Yep. Donny's plupper. Well, he's not a flurf. He's a yerf. He's a young earther. So he's a yerf, not a flurf. Because he definitely isn't a flat earther. I will say that as something for Kent Hovind. That's one of the good things I can say about Kent Hovind. He's definitely not a flurf. He definitely isn't. But he is a yerf, a complete yerf. And a sovereign citizen, obviously, and thinks that and a conspiracy theorist that the Democrats are, causing hurricanes and then, sending out FEMA. And the crazy thing is, here's the crazy thing. Because of people like Kent Hovind, right, who is saying, hey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think, said it as well, that the Democrats created this hurricane in order to win the election by sending out FEMA to, convince people that they can do a good job. I don't know Badger's law, no. But the problem is now that FEMA workers are being accosted. This is the crazy thing. People who are emergency workers working for FEMA are being accosted going, why did you create the hurricane? Like, it's so bad. And it's because of crazy sovereign citizen, let's face it, nutbags like Kent Hovind. That's why they're being accosted. People trying to help others through a disaster. It's absolute nonsense. And Donny puts this guy on his channel. This is Donny's guy. He's the expert. Okay, I'll look it up. I'm game. I've got the internet and I'm game. Badger's law. Why are badgers protected by law? Is that the misinformation one that it takes way more in order to yeah, I'm not getting a lot, to be honest with you. To correct. So there's one where it takes much more effort to correct misinformation. It's Brandolini's law. It takes much more effort to correct misinformation than it is to put that information out there. So anybody can just put information out all the time, and I 100% am. Like, seriously, I don't know what you want from me. Oh, okay. So Badger's law states, I actually found it on Rational Wiki, which is fine. States that the content of any website which contains the word truth in its name or URL states anything but that. Okay, that's good. I like it. Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Maybe I should be reading for truth. Maybe that should be my YouTube name. There you go. There you go. Okay, gotcha. That's interesting. I thought you were referring to Brandolini's law, which is sort of, it takes so little effort to put out misinformation, but it takes a ton to actually correct it. So it's that inequality before. Yeah, I did like it, absolutely. It's that inequality between putting out misinformation and actually correcting the misinformation. But yeah, this has been picking on Donny for a couple of hours. I hope you've enjoyed it. I had a blast. I really did want to point out where sort of papers have been quote mined, papers have been misrepresented. I did want to point that out, and I think I did a fairly decent job of doing so. I also, it's a bit of a catharsis for me. Donny annoyed me. I feel much better now. I really do feel much better now. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you had a good time. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you can. It really helps a lot. Check out Creation Myths. Check out Big Bad Mama. Absolutely check out Big Bad Mama, because that's some hilarious stuff right there. It's kind of, it's really weird, isn't it? The sort of, yeah, it's hilarious. Then you think about it and you're like, wow, that's actually really dangerous. Like sort of making that. Someone like Hovind, who has a bunch of sort of young earth creationists behind him with very, very poor critical, that's kind of dangerous, thinking that the US isn't a government, it's a corporation, and I don't have to listen to it because it's not, that's actually dangerous. But thank you so much, everybody. Don't forget to be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.